Welcome to this unsealed briefing. Go ahead and settle in, clear your mind, and really prepare yourself for this one. Because the explainer we're walking through today, it isn't just a history lesson. It's about human behavior, the absolute darkest corners of our psychology, and most importantly, it's about you. Today, we're opening a classified file on the Milgram Experiment. Let's dive into the darkness. Just let the sheer heavy weight of that question linger for a second. How did ordinary people, teachers, fathers, neighbors, folks who went to church and walked their dogs, how did they commit some of the absolute worst atrocities in human history? After World War II, the whole world was desperately asking this exact question. We all wanted to believe that supreme evil required, literal monsters. But in 1961, a Yale psychologist named Stanley Milgram decided to go looking for the real answer. And what is truly terrifying is what Milgram actually uncovered. In 1961, his investigation officially kicked off. His goal was pretty straightforward. He just wanted to understand the mechanics of obedience to authority. But he stumbled onto something far more disturbing than anyone, honestly, even Milgram himself, could have ever expected. It literally changed everything we thought we knew about human nature. And the most crucial takeaway? This dark truth doesn't just apply to some distant generation back in the 1940s. It applies directly to you, watching this right now. All right, let's look at the setup and see how this whole thing builds. To get his answers, Milgram needed a perfectly controlled environment. So he recruited everyday, ordinary Americans, just regular volunteers who answered a simple newspaper ad. When they showed up at the Yale campus, they were told they were taking part in a standard, routine study on memory and learning. They genuinely believed they were helping advance educational science, but they weren't. The whole setup, the entire thing, was just an elaborate, carefully constructed deception. Let me break down the twisted rules of this experiment for you. Step 1. The volunteer was always assigned the role of the teacher. Step 2. In the very next room, separated by a thin wall, sat the learner. Now, what the teacher didn't know was that this learner was actually an actor on Milgram's payroll. The teacher couldn't see the learner, but they could hear him loud and clear. Step 3. The teacher was instructed to test the learner on a series of word pairs. And here's the catch. Every single time the hidden learner made a mistake, the teacher was ordered to press a button and deliver an electric shock. And this is right where the tension really starts to escalate. See, the shocks weren't just static. With every wrong answer the learner gave, the voltage went up. The teacher sat there in front of this massive, intimidating shock machine. The dials and switches were meticulously labeled. They started out on a mild 15 volts, but they climbed switch by switch all the way up to an agonizing 450 volts. And those final switches, they were marked with a severe, chilling warning. Just 2 words, XXX, danger. As that voltage increased, the horrific realities set in. The learner in the next room began to scream. The teacher could hear the begging, the frantic pounding on the wall, the desperate claims of a heart condition. And the ordinary volunteers sitting at that machine, they started to sweat, they trembled, they hesitated. It was absolutely agonizing for them. When the screaming simply became too much, the teachers would almost always turn around. They'd look at the experimenter, a stern man in a gray lab coat holding a clipboard, and they'd plead, "I don't want to do this anymore. We have to stop. He's hurt." But they were met with this cold, unyielding script. The man in the coat would calmly reply, "Please continue. The experiment requires that you continue." Think about that. No physical force, no explicit threats, just the quiet, heavy pressure of authority. 450. That was the absolute maximum voltage on the board. The level marked with XXX, a potentially fatal electric shock. Now, before they even reached this point, the actor in the other room would fall completely silent. No screaming, no answers, heavily implying he was either unconscious or worse, dead. And the man in the lab coat? He would simply say, "Treat the absence of an answer as a wrong answer. Please continue." And here is the truly chilling punchline of the whole Milgram experiment. 65% of the participants delivered the absolute maximum shock. They actually pushed that final button, despite the screams, despite the desperate begging, despite that terrifying silence that followed. More than half of the everyday citizens who walked into that laboratory went all the way to 450 volts, simply because a man in a lab coat told them they had to. These folks were not criminals. They weren't psychopaths. They were ordinary people, just like you. And I really want you to internalize this for a second. It is so incredibly easy to distance ourselves, right? To sit there and say, no way, I would never do that. I would have stood up and walked right out. But the data doesn't care about our comfort. These participants weren't sadists. They were profoundly distressed by what they were doing. Yet, they did it anyway, just because they were following instructions. So, as we flip deeper into this classified file, we move from the raw, terrifying data to the fundamental question, why? What's the actual mechanism behind this? How does a perfectly good person override their own deeply held moral compass just because some guy holding a clipboard gives them an order? Let's take a look at the psychological shift that makes this horror possible. The crucial mechanism at play here is what Milgram termed the agentic state. Basically, it's a profound psychological shift. It happens when a person places themselves entirely under the authority of another. In this state, you literally cease to see yourself as the author of your own actions. You become an agent, just an instrument of someone else's will. The moral weight, the guilt, the crushing responsibility, it all just shifts upward, entirely onto the authority figure. It's the ultimate psychological escape hatch. I didn't do it, I was just the instrument. And this perfectly illustrates the silent battle happening within the human mind. Individual responsibility versus systemic duty. Milgram realized something profound here. Entering the agentic state, it isn't a sign of stupidity. It's not some fatal character flaw or weakness. It's actually a deeply embedded psychological mechanism. It's the exact same trait that kept hierarchical human societies functioning for thousands of years. But under the right, carefully manipulated conditions, this exact same mechanism makes extreme cruelty feel not just acceptable, but like a required systemic duty. Which brings us to the most disturbing truth of all. The Milgram Experiment revealed that 65% of ordinary Americans possess this active mechanism. It's not some rare anomaly, it's the majority. The agentic state is a dark, incredibly clear reflection of humanity. It shows us that the line dividing good and evil isn't drawn between nations or classes or political parties. It's a line that runs straight through every human heart, just waiting for an authority figure to give the order. Now, let's connect this right back to its historical catalyst, because the timing of this study, it's literally everything. 1945, the Holocaust ends, leaving the entire world completely shattered. Fast forward to 1960. Adolf Eichmann, the high-ranking Nazi officer heavily responsible for organizing the transportation of millions to death camps, he's captured, and his trial begins. The world watches, mesmerized and horrified. And then 1961, just 1 year later, Milgram launches his experiment. He specifically wanted to see if Eichmann's psychological profile was unique to him, or if it was universal. See, during his trial, Adolf Eichmann offered a defense that was chilling in its absolute stark simplicity. He just said, "I was following orders." At the time, the world scoffed at it. They completely dismissed it as the pathetic excuse of a bloodthirsty monster. But Milgram's experiment, it proved something far more terrifying. He proved that "I was following orders" wasn't just a monster's excuse. It is the literal confession of the agentic state. The Holocaust didn't require millions of monsters. It required ordinary people, authority figures, and a system that perfectly absorbed all individual responsibility. Now, I know exactly what you might be thinking right now. Well, that was the 1960s. We're totally different now. But let's shift our focus to the present day. The agentic state is not just some relic of history preserved in black and white photographs. It is a highly active mechanism. It's live, it's breathing, and it is functioning in our society, in our workplaces, and in our governments, right now, as we speak. We literally see this dark psychology at work every single day. Every time a soldier follows an obviously unlawful military order just because a commanding officer barked it out. Every time an employee stays silent and facilitates massive corporate wrongdoing because, well, the boss signed off on it. Every time there's bystander inaction, people watching a tragedy unfold and doing absolutely nothing because an authority figure on the scene told them it was fine. Without constant, vigilant awareness, absolutely no one is immune to submitting to authority. So Stanley Milgram set out to understand the Holocaust, and instead, he handed us a mirror. The question is no longer whether this mechanism, this terrifying capacity to inflict harm under orders, exists within you. It does. We are all wired for it. The real question is this: now that you know the disturbing truth of your own psychology, what are you going to do with that knowledge? The next time someone in charge tells you to push the button, will you? Consider this unsealed file officially closed, at least for now. But trust me, there is so much more beneath the surface.
If you want to understand the forbidden psychology, the buried history, and the dark truths they never ever taught you in school, then you need to subscribe to Dark Archive. We open a new file every single week to help you understand the true nature of human behavior. So hit that subscribe button. The archive is open.